What's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about high intensity training. And so if you guys are unaware, high intensity training is essentially a form of training that revolves around quality over quantity, whereby in the gym, you're performing short but highly intense sessions where you're taking basically every set to failure and a lot of times beyond with intensity heightening techniques, with the premise that these short but highly intense workouts that are focused on quality over quantity are going to be more effective at stimulating muscle growth than the normal going through the motions, high volume, high frequency bodybuilding routines that are so common in the fitness industry. It's important to keep in mind that there are many different interpretations of high intensity training, and there have been many different advocates for high intensity training with slightly different methods. So I can't speak for all of them in this video, but what I can do and what I'm going to do is talk about the general principles behind all of them, which is, as I said, a lower volume of training where you're putting more effort into a reduced amount of training, an emphasis on recovery and a low overall training frequency. So you guys might be thinking, like, that's literally the exact training style that you teach with Polarity Fitness. And you'd be right to a degree, because I agree with a lot of the general principles that the high intensity training methods have in common, and my philosophy has a lot of key aspects in common with it. However, and the reason I made this video is because I believe there are a lot of people nowadays who have misconstrued the message behind high intensity training and believe that it's the be all end all. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. This whole high intensity training movement was started by guys like Mike Mentzer and Dorian Yates, who were bodybuilders back in the day, who essentially went against the status quo and built their physiques with like a fraction of the training volume of most conventional bodybuilding routines. And it's true that intensity can largely replace volume, and the harder you train, the less training you need. So funny enough, I've never actually delved very deep into the teachings of guys like Mike Mentzer and Dorian Yates, and a lot of people leave comments on my videos saying how similar my approach is to Mike Mentzer. And naturally, Polarity Fitness has been lumped into this high intensity training niche, which has been completely unintentional on my end. I've noticed that on the internet, the way people remember you is by slapping a few keywords they associate with you onto your name. And so some of these for me might be things like low volume training, minimalist training, low frequency training, and of course, high intensity training. But this annoys me a little bit, because in order to get any reach on YouTube, you have to use these certain keywords and these certain terms that basically confine you to a box and confine you to a certain niche. But I really wish I didn't have to, because what I would really name my practices and my philosophy would be something like real drug-free fitness practices, or practical and effective fitness for the genetically normal drug-free lifter who doesn't care about living in the gym. And I fucking cringe when I have to use terms like minimalist training, high intensity training, low volume training. I really don't like how caught up people get in the tactics related to fitness. And if you guys watched my last video, which I highly recommend you do, I was basically talking about how to know who to trust and who to avoid in the fitness industry. And long story short, the people you need to avoid in the fitness industry are those who are teaching based on purely tactics instead of the fundamental principles and basics that are timeless and will never change. Because while tactics are very important, they are not the be all end all. And if your knowledge is based on purely tactics rather than fundamental principles that are timeless, then your knowledge is built on a shaky foundation rather than solid ground. So while things like high intensity training, low volume training, low frequency training, minimalist training are all pillars of the Polarity Fitness philosophy, you have to understand that these are just tactics that we use to go about achieving the overarching principle and strategy of progressive poundages and getting stronger. Because the truth is that in all of these little niches that I just recommended, including high intensity training, the people usually believe that the tactic is the be all end all rather than a means to an end. And that's what all of these tactics are. They're a means to help us achieve the overarching strategy, the overarching principles. And before you guys go crazy in the comments section, trust me, I know that there are guys within these niches who do understand that the tactics that they teach are a means to an end. They are a means to achieve progression. But I also know that there are a lot of people within these niches who are teaching fitness who teach based on the premise that the tactic is the be all end all rather than a means to an end, which is simply not the case. In this particular case of high intensity training, like, yes, do not get it twisted. You have to train hard. In fact, you're gonna have to train about 10 times as hard as the average gym goer who's just going through the motions if you want to achieve success with your physique. Hard work and high intensity is a linchpin of effective training, and you are no stranger to this fact if you've spent any considerable amount of time with me. And most people simply do not train hard enough. Most people's failure point is about 3 to 5 reps shy of their actual failure point, and they never train hard enough to actually stimulate muscle and strength gains. But here's the difference between Polarity Fitness and the high intensity training niche. Many guys in the high intensity training niche believe that training hard and bringing high levels of intensity is the end in and of itself. And again, don't go freaking out in the comment section. I know that there are exceptions to this rule. But what I believe, and what is the case for every drug-free lifter, is that high intensity training, training hard, working hard in the gym, pushing close to failure, it's a tool that we use to achieve progressive poundages on our lifts. High intensity training is not the bottom line. Progressive poundages are. The value of bringing high levels of effort to your training is not the effort per se. What counts is the progressive overload that high intensity can produce. And this is the key. This is what you have to remember. Just pushing yourself really hard and to the absolute limit in itself will not make you bigger or stronger. And a common practice among the high intensity training believers is the use of intensity heightening techniques such as drop sets, force reps, negatives, all of which will do more harm than good and prevent you from recovering between workouts and achieving progressive overload. Remember this. To achieve the progressive poundages that produce gains in strength and muscular development, you must fully recover from your training. So train hard, but avoid overtraining. And then when you leave the gym, you'll feel well worked and fatigued, but not exhausted and not able to recover in time for your next workout in order to be able to add a little bit of strength, to get a little bit stronger and overcompensate. This way you can actually get around to actually growing and building muscle and strength instead of just struggling to recover from the insane fatigue and soreness that comes from a lot of the high intensity training methods. And understand that it's possible to train yourself into the ground and push yourself to the limits, but not train progressively. So guys, the key for drug-free lifters is in doing just enough hard work to stimulate muscle and strength gains, and then getting out of the gym, resting, recovering, eating properly, and then coming back the next workout or every other workout with the ability to make small leaps in strength. This is the key, because then you're going to be stringing together progressive workouts. And technically speaking, the fastest gains you're ever going to achieve as a natural lifter will come from stringing together the most possible progressive workouts, whereby each workout, every other workout, you're adding a little bit of strength, whether that's in reps, whether that's in weight on the bar. That's what's going to produce the gains in muscular development that you are seeking. And so if you just fucking push yourself to the limit in every single workout and overtrain yourself, sure, you are training very hard, you are creating some sort of stimulus, but you have to train within your ability to recover. And if you train beyond your ability to recover, as I said, you're not going to be able to recover between workouts. And if you don't recover between workouts, you're not able to achieve that progressive overload over time, which is the primary driver of your gains, not just training hard in and of itself. So remember that for natural lifters, progressive poundages are the measure of progress, not intensity. You don't want to annihilate yourself in each workout, because then you're not gonna be able to come back the next workout with the ability to make any progress. You're just gonna be struggling to recover from the workout itself, not actually getting around to doing any growth in muscle and strength. And therefore, each workout is just, it's not gonna be a step forward. You're just gonna be running on a hamster wheel. You're not actually going to make any forward progress over time, because you're always just extremely sore and fatigued from the high intensity training. Driving yourself to exhaustion in every workout invites inevitable stagnation and regression. It's better to err on the side of conservatism and create gaining momentum, whereby every 1 to 2 weeks you have the ability to go up a little bit in strength and actually progress forward. I think a lot of people forget that while yes, these high intensity training methods that have been popularized will generally speaking work better for the normal drug-free lifter than these conventional high volume, high frequency bodybuilding routines, you have to understand that these guys still blasted shitloads of drugs, and they have a much greater recovery ability than the average drug-free lifter with a life outside of the gym. So if you guys think guys like Dorian Yates and Mike Mentzer weren't blasting shitloads of drugs, then you're out of your fucking mind, quite frankly. So these routines, while they will generally speaking work better, they are still crafted by steroid users. These crazy high intensity techniques that are so popular among the high intensity training believers would absolutely destroy a drug-free lifter and prevent him from stringing together progressive workouts over time, which in reality is what is going to be the driver of gains, not just training themselves into the ground. Another thing I really don't believe in is the very slow rep cadence that a lot of these high intensity training guys recommend, because the reality is that time under tension is not an important factor for muscle growth in natural lifters. And it's funny because a lot of guys are actually hurting their gains by doing these crazy long eccentrics and concentrics and squeezing out extremely long sets, because you know what is the primary driver of muscle growth in natural lifters is tension. And if you're lowering the weight that you're using to the point where you can squeeze out like 1 to 2 minute long sets and you're doing these crazy long eccentrics and concentrics, then you're actually producing an inferior stimulus and less tension, but actually hurting your recovery and your gains, because these crazy long sets make you excessively sore while actually producing an inferior stimulus to if you would have just done a normal set with a normal rep cadence and used a considerable weight. So at the end of the day, guys, I agree with most of what the high intensity training guys recommend and a lot of the core principles behind the high intensity training approaches, but I do believe that a high intensity training approach that doesn't prioritize progression is just as bad as some bullshit going through the motions, high volume, high frequency bodybuilding routine, because the bottom line is always progression. It's always progressive overload over time, not just training hard to train hard, because that is not the end in and of itself. We use high intensity as a means to achieve progressive overload because that's always going to be the bottom line and that always has to stay the primary focus. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to pick up my free 13-point drug-free muscle building checklist that will teach you the 13 fundamentals of drug-free physique building that you quite simply cannot build muscle without. So you guys can check that out. I'll send it to you for free and we'll talk soon. Peace.